Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday night, or if you're watching this the next day, hopefully you're having a great day that day. Make sure you join us every single week, every Tuesday. If you're watching this on replay or you're new to the stream this week, we go live every single Tuesday talking about the latest and greatest in Star Wars news, as well as taking your live questions. So these streams, especially as we get further and further away from the Andor aftermath and May the 4th and Star Wars Celebration and all the stuff that came out in that big couple month stretch for Star Wars. These streams are going to start relying on your questions even more so. So, joining us and asking whatever you want now is a great time to do so. We have a fantastic community. We really love talking to you all. So, this is your chance to join, ask as many questions as you want. And then also something to plug as well. You might have seen on the channel today, dropped a clip from one of our old live streams from a question that somebody asked. It could be your question that becomes the next video. We just pick and choose based on the best conversations we have with you and amongst ourselves during these streams about what we think is a good clippable piece of content. So if you guys have a question you've been saving, something you really want to know, some hot topic question, something you really would like to see us expand on, you might be the person featured on the cover of the next video. We do feature your question and your tag as well on each video, so make sure you ask that question if you've always wanted to know the answer to something. Also, make sure you hit the like button. We have more people watching right now than have liked the video. It's one of the easiest ways you can show your support. The other easiest way is to subscribe to the channel. Like I said, we do this every single Tuesday. So if you're somebody who's interested in Star Wars content, Star Wars news, just chatting with us and chatting with our community, make sure you join us every single Tuesday to watch these live streams. Content will still be coming out. Last week was a High Republic dominated week. We finally got our review out for Into the Light, and then we did get on the day of release out for Trials of the Jedi. If you would like to check out that review, both are non-spoiler, although Into the Light's been out for a couple months now, so you might not, care about spoilers. Trials of the Jedi, though, I know a lot of you do. And I know we have some questions about Trials of the Jedi in the chat. We'll try to keep it as non spoilery as possible for a couple more weeks. We haven't decided a date, but maybe as early as next week or the week after, we're going to do a live stream, High Republic kind of recap, Trials of the Jedi centric spoiler discussion, talking about the whole initiative and everything that we thought about the whole thing. So save some of your spoilery stuff for that. Most of the stuff in the chat is kind of light spoilers, anyways. So we'll get to some of it without trying to expand on too much to spoil it for those who haven't read the actual book yet. But make sure you check out our review because it is non spoiler related. We also have a lot more content coming your way. We're trying to get with these clips coming back into the fold on the channel post Andor. We're getting content up twice a week, every week. I know it was a Tuesday today, but we will have content starting about Monday, Friday, every single week. We have videos out every single Friday. And so I want to get videos starting out on Mondays as well. So we're going to have Monday, Friday streams for Tuesdays. And if you're obviously not watching live, then you get this Wednesday. We also have shorts Monday, Wednesday, Friday content on the polls twice a day, every day. And for those of you who are joining tonight and you like to have these discussions with us, YouTube does offer a new feature for the community tab in the posts. It's something don't highly advertise because they like the polls, like offering that. But if you have something you would like to ask our community, you can post it in the community section now yourself. It's not just us. Anybody can post in community. So if you have a hot topic that you would like to know what everybody's thoughts are, you can post it there. It is subject to our approval, but we will approve it as long as it's not inappropriate. We will approve it, and we'll see what you guys think about certain topics. So make sure you check that out. That is a new feature that YouTube just launched within the last couple weeks. So it is something we definitely want to experiment with as well. All right, let's get into the news today. And this was one of the lightest Star Wars news weeks in forever. ever. Like this was even before Andor came out, we had the kind of the build to Andor. We still had some stuff to talk about with that. We had Skeleton Crew shortly before Andor, only a couple month gap. This week we had almost nothing happen in the world of Star Wars, except for some more contradictory reports because what's new about the Rey movie. So, for those of you who have not been keeping up with this saga, and no, I'm not talking about the Skywalker saga because we might not never seen more continuation of that. We're talking about the Rey movie saga. It was posted by notorious kind of insider, scooper, leaker Daniel Richtman on his Patreon that the Ray movie was now being shelved. It wasn't going to stop production, but they were just kind of like, maybe realistically, like all of us, just like, we're not going to treat it as something that's like coming out anytime soon. We're putting it on the back burner. We'll still work on it. We'll still have our writers working on it. We'll try to crack the code, but it's not something that we think needs to come out, in the next few years. It's just a thing that's now up in the air. And a lot of us were like, yeah, I mean, that's basically how it's been for the last 2 years, considering we've changed writers 3 times. The fact that it's gone through all these different evolutions and stages, and then in the meantime we've now gone from this being our first post Rise of Skywalker movie to Starfighter with Sean Levy and Ryan Gosling being our first post Rise of Skywalker movie to Simon Kinberg possibly doing a trilogy of movies with Ray involved in those movies. So it's just turned into this whole saga that just it's gone from a one movie kind of like test trial phase to actually now we're going to do a bunch of different stuff, and we don't really know if this specific movie, which was supposed to be 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker, is actually going to fit into the plans anymore. So this was eventually semi debunked by another insider scooper named Jeff Snyder, who we've talked a lot about. Jeff Snyder's you know stories he's broken in the past, and he does have a lot of very accurate information for the most part. He's later said that same day that this is not necessarily the case, that they are still actively working on it, they just don't have the script and they're writing it. Basically, he said that it's actively being written. Lucasfilm is still waiting on the Ray movie to be delivered. That script has not been finalized. If it was on hold, they'd say, you know what, stop writing, we're not ever going to do it. But they're actually just waiting for the script, so it's not really on hold. As I've said in the past, that movie is not the only one with Ray in it as the lead character. There are multiple projects being developed with Ray as the main character. So a little bit of conflicting information by different scoopers in Hollywood. Sonic, which one do you buy a little bit more? Do you think the Ray movie is being shelved for the time being? Or do you think that we're basically in the same place, still waiting for a script, still waiting to crack that code, and then eventually we'll start moving on the surrounding pieces of the production?
I wanna say that they're still trying to crack the code here. I think just with how many people have been involved in the script, I wouldn't be surprised if now they're kinda running into the issue of, like, too many cooks in the kitchen. They're like, "Is this all conflicting now? Does it even make sense? Are we patching things together?" 'Cause we know even in all these discussions, Lucasfilm has identified Rey as still their biggest live action draw, like, this is still, like, the biggest figure that people know in Star Wars, because, I mean, let's face it, no matter what your thoughts are on the sequels, you know it's Rey and Kylo. Those are, like, really your big 2 figures there, right? And, obviously, it seems like they're not really actively trying to push for Ben Solo, his ghost, or anything to sort of come out of there. I know we've talked about, like, it'd be really interesting to have, like, them be kinda connected through the netherworld of the Force or, like, swap places out, like, some strange abilities with their dyad, but for right now, whatever is gonna happen next with Rey, it's up in the air, right? And, yeah, when it was first announced, I think they were trying to connect, like we thought, everything with Dawn of the Jedi to Ahsoka, and then Rey's New Jedi Order. They'd have some couple pieces connecting them together, and it seemed like a fairly sound idea despite, obviously, very different time periods. But yeah, now that doesn't seem like that's happening. Obviously, Starfighter supposedly we're gonna start seeing production begin in the fall. I have a lot more faith in that, obviously, because Sean Levy has been grinding away in Hollywood like recently. It's not even funny. Like he's done so many different movies. Obviously, his last big endeavor was Deadpool and Wolverine, and that was pretty well received, and I found a lot of emotional core to that compared to what I've usually seen from other works from him. I've seen him do some great action, obviously, with Stranger Things, and I think he's had some of the best episodes in that whole series. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about how that's going to go, especially since you don't just walk Gosling out there, especially Daisy Ridley and all these people like Adam Driver. Like when they were first introduced, like cool, they were maybe known more critically or like up and coming or like new fresh talent. Gosling is he's been in the game for so long, right? And I think you can't run into an issue like Marvel's having with Mahershala Ali and Blade, like, that would just be horrible, like, part of me thinks they almost brought Gosling on because they saw all the memes that people post online of him from different movies and all that, and they're like, "We need a face, we just need a face until we figure out what's going on with Rey's movie," like, we need people to be like, "Oh, locked in something, see some cool humor, some stoicism," whatever blend of acting he's gonna bring out. It's cool that they also got Mia Goth to officially announced there. Obviously, she was not the first pick apparently. Apparently, that was gonna go to, I'm blanking on her name, the girl from Anora,
Mikey
um,
Madison. Yeah.
Mikey Madison, right? Like, it seemed like she was gonna have it the same day, like, she rejected it, like, basically, it's like, "Okay, but you've been hearing these things in the trays and all that. There's been real movement." All of this stuff with Rey's new Jedi Order film, it's just been scooper war. Like, it's just one person says this, another person says that. Maybe you hear a tidbit in one of the trades, but it's nothing definitive. It's only like when a writer has exited, honestly. So I think they're still working on it. I think they're just now kind of approaching it as like we have 15 years from the original concept after the Rise of Skywalker. We don't need to rush it. Like, yes, it's been 6 years since, A Rise of Skywalker came out, but we still have technically 9 more. So I think there isn't necessarily a rush for it in the same way that you might have felt with, like, the original trilogy actors coming back for the sequels. You're like, "We have to, like, get their big moments in," right, and all that. Now you can kinda go through what everyone was hoping for in the '90s and late '80s with the sequel characters, let them kinda spring in a couple of different stories. We're seeing the struggles that they're having with the Mandoverse. They're refusing to recast so far. The deepfake is good, don't get me wrong, but is it enough to carry a full performance yet? Not quite. And, a lot of people are having a lot more mixed feelings about AI as it's becoming more and more prevalent, especially in entertainment. We've had whole strikes and everything for that. So, yeah, I think it's shelved in the sense of, like, it's shelved from being a priority, but I think they're building towards it. I wouldn't be surprised. I know people there've been some rumors and some discussions of, like, oh, Gosling might be force sensitive, but maybe his, like, nephew or the kid that he's protecting his son or whatever might also be force sensitive, and then they'll show up in the Rey's New Jedi Order film as, like, one of the students at the academy or something, right? And I think that's the smartest move you can do. Make these things that you flesh out the sequel era. Start off with Starfighter, things that don't necessarily have to be big, but can occupy different chunks of territory in people's headspace of, like, what the sequel era feels like, how the galaxy is dealing with everything. Clarify things like what's the difference between the First Order and the Final Order, why there's very imperial looking star destroyers, but then cool Sith troopers that have very much like First Order inspired, armor and all that. Like, this is a great chance to just kind of play with how that's looking like from the sequels of things that aren't super clear, that don't feel super fleshed out. The political state of the galaxy before, during, and after the sequels, especially. Build out the world, just you don't have to make it huge stories, but you can make some really entertaining ones, and then you can have Rey kind of pop in her head here and there, and Finn start showing up and leading some like more militant Jedi or First Order reclaimed stormtroopers, or maybe we see Poe show up and, like, come in with, like, a squadron and save Gosling and the kid at the last moment or something. There's many different ways you can just filter in these characters, have them be active, take up 15 to 30 minutes of time without committing to a whole new film with them just yet. Build up their reputation, build up a cast of characters and a group that they can be with, because that's something that the prequel characters had. That's something the original trilogy characters had. By the Rise of Skywalker, everything had kinda shrunk into, like, this is just Rey and Kylo/Ben slash Ben leading it, Palpatine's thrown in here, and then everybody else just kept on losing more value. This is a chance to grow everything foundationally, and then once you get people's reputations for the character a little bit more improved, slowly over different movies, maybe some TV shows, animation, whatever it might be, then that just gives you more confidence in knowing like, okay, this is kind of what people are really appreciating about right now. This is what they're appreciating about the sequel era. That's going to feed into how our writing is going to really play out in the execution of that in the script. So yeah, I think it's, it's shelved in the sense of, like, as a priority, but they're gonna keep working on it, and I think they're gonna take the feedback, the reactions of people. Again, I'm always a little bit nervous about that when you're almost, like, reacting to, like, what the fans are saying because that was what was happening between episode 8 and 9. I would have rather have them committed to a little bit more of a congruent vision between Ryan Johnson and J.J. Abrams that actually connected what they're doing instead of almost feeling like a little bit of whiplash with JJ kinda coming back, and especially since they needed an extra 6 months, and Iger didn't let them. Obviously, COVID happened and all that, but you need to stabilize how people feel about it, you need to make things feel a little bit more congruent, you have to build out the era, the world. You do that, I think that movie moves along quite well afterwards, but don't just react to like, "Oh, something slightly negative." We know how much online discourse can change people's opinions very quickly the quicker you're on that, right? Already I saw for, like, something like Ironheart today, Rotten Tomatoes had to close their, what is it? The reviews for the fan section because people were already review bombing it. It hasn't even aired yet, right? The first 3 episodes haven't come out yet, but that people see that and immediately, how YouTube is, how social media is, it just builds up those cycles. I hope Disney has learned not to be super reactive, but be open-minded, just but take your time, react as you feel necessary, that in a way that only enables the story to be better and allows for other stories to kind of build up those steps toward that new Jedi Order film. It's a nice idea, but, maybe having that as the first piece was gonna always be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I think it would be just honestly a flat out mistake to have made this like the first movie back into theaters. I think it's too divisive. It's the Rey movie can exist, and I want it to. Like I want redemption for these characters, this era, the sequels. But it's right now the most divisive thing Star Wars has is the sequel era. And so on a down streak, you don't want to go in when you're struggling and be like, "Yeah, I now want to face the best pitcher in all of the major leagues while I'm also haven't gotten a hit in my last 25 games." It's like that's kind of where they're at is they need a string of successes. If they have Andor season 2, which is a great thing to have left us on for the remainder of this year. Yes, Vision season 3, but nobody's really going to count that towards their win-loss, record here for Star Wars movies and TV. So you have you have Andor season 2 on a high. If you come into next year and whatever the first project is next year, I'm assuming it's Mandalorian and Grogu. I wouldn't put it past it actually being Maul Shadow Lord starting at the beginning of next year. It looks like it's fairly far along, but and animation has with Star Wars with the Bad Batch come out in January twice in the last 2 seasons of mainline Star Wars animated TV. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's Maul Shadow Lord at the beginning of the year, but I feel like it's going to be Mandalorian and Grogu. And so if Mandalorian and Grogu is the thing that kicks off Star Wars next year, that needs to be a hit. And then you follow that up with Maul Shadow Lord. And then you follow it up with Ahsoka season 2 and if that's really good. And then if you follow it up with Ninth Jedi, which is like their big experiment next year with it being the first full series of anime that Star Wars has ever done. If you have 4 legit hits in 2026 coming off of the maybe the best thing Disney Star Wars has ever done in Andor season 2, now you're on a hot streak. And yes, it won't feel like a full hot streak because it's only been like a year or year and a half, 2 years worth of doing really well. But if they can get 2025, 2026, 2027, almost everything they make is at least good, like consensus good, then you run in with the right movie. Because you've built up enough goodwill to where, yes, it will still get review bombed. Yes, it still will have its haters online. But you've built up enough goodwill to where, like, those people who might be on the fence, they're like, the sequels weren't really my thing. But right now they're like, but Star Wars has just sucked or it's been mediocre. I haven't really enjoyed Star Wars for a while, so I don't think I'll see the Ray movie. If you build up enough goodwill, then those people are like, oh, the sequels weren't really my thing, but Star Wars has been so good lately. Maybe I'll go check it out. Maybe it'll be a little better. You just flip the narrative. And so I don't think it's a mistake for them to just be like, hey, let's take our time with this. Let's take as long as it possibly needs. Daisy Ridley is still very young. And if the movie is still taking place 15 years after Rise of Skywalker, they still have like 6, 7 years left to work with before it hits 15 years after Rise of Skywalker, assuming this comes out like at the earliest 2029, 2030. You have until 2035 for it to be like a real 15 years after Rise of Skywalker. So you've got a little bit of time to work with, or 2034, excuse me. So you've got some time to work with, and I think just getting Star Wars back on stable footing to where at least 4 out of 5 things are pretty good, and maybe 2 out of 5 things are great. If they can get to that point, they'll have earned enough goodwill that I think people who aren't sequel fans, who do have some interest in just whatever Star Wars next Star Wars is, doesn't matter who's involved, those people will give it a chance. But right now, I think those people aren't giving things a chance because they've invested time and money into Star Wars projects they haven't really been satisfied with. So I don't think this is a mistake at all, and I think both people are kind of right in this scenario. Like I think it's still in development. I don't think it's completely being shelved. The only reason I could see it completely being shelved is just that they like what Sean Levy and what Simon Kinberg are doing more. And they're like, hey, this is a great start to our post Rise of Skywalker stuff. Let's just get Ray back in these projects first. And then we'll tackle 15 years later when we get to 15 years later. Like, we don't need to rush the future when we have these stories that are supposed to take place right now. Let's just do these so we don't confuse people, so we don't have all these crisscrossing timelines. That's where I can see this is shelved. But if that's not the case, then I think they're just kind of biding their time until it's a little less divisive to have a Ray movie come out. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. We do have a lot of comments here, and I'm going to scrub through, make sure none of them are about the Ray movie, because we'll take any comments or questions you guys have about the Ray movie and this story prior to getting into the actual Q&A portion of tonight's stream. Let's see. We have, it looks like the only one about Ray right now. And again, if you want to send in your comment about the Ray project before we move on to our next topic, is Anthony, YouTube fan, who just sent one in, says, hello, gentlemen. Very excited about the final novel in the High Republic, Master of Evil, Maul Shadow Lord, Mando and Grogu, Star Wars Visions, and Star Wars Starfighter. No to the Ray movie. And Anthony, I mean, you're kind of in the majority opinion right now, and just that people, I don't think anybody's there's a group, not anybody, there is a group of people who are diehard sequel fans or diehard Ray fans who will go see this, but you're part of the majority who is at least mixed about the idea of seeing Ray in a movie again. And I don't think it's specifically her. I just think she's part of the representation of this era that is very, very divisive, and that the majority of the loud voice online has been the hate towards the sequels, and the people who don't really care one way or the other, who have not had a strong opinion, I think have been more swayed by that opinion than by the opinion that they are good. So just in general, you have to win back those middle ground people back to the side of, we can like this character again and these stories around this character. And then after that, you deal with the people who are just going to hate on it no matter what. Eventually, they'll look incredibly silly, like some people have with Andor season 2, if you're trying to come up with criticisms that pretty much everybody's like, yeah, these are this innately dumb. So if you get to that point, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of good stuff. But if they can get to that point, then I think Ray's worth doing. But I think you kind of represent the general consensus right now, Anthony, that there are a lot of people who are just going to say, no, I'm not seeing that no matter what. And I think that's a huge risk for them when they're trying to get their footing again.
Yeah, and I know Anthony also commented as you were talking, Liam, how, if Simon Kinberg trilogy is to be episode 10 through 12, I hope it takes place 125 to 200 ABY, Rey is an albatross and can't carry another trilogy. I disagree. I think Daisy actually had some really great performances. Episode 9 is her best performance. Acting is very different than writing. It's just you can't they go hand in hand, but you cannot say Daisy Ridley can't do that. She has been proven to be a great actress. She has had a pretty recent film, yeah, pretty limited release from Disney, but it's gotten great reviews, and never has she ever been singled out as a bad performance. You can always single out the writing around it. You can always single out the execution. You can always single out, like, the concepts that she's had to been forced to carry, but yeah, I just don't agree with that sentence because, like, your previous sentence, you're saying, "Oh, excited for the final novel in the High Republic Trials of the Jedi," right? There are people online who have never given a second of consideration to the High Republic and just hated it from the start. We've seen it on our channel too, and some of our earliest comments when he had, like, 300 subscribers, like, "Oh, dislikes, like, oh, you this is stupid, like, this is terrible, it's ruining the Old Republic," even though, they're not the same thing at all. Right, Master of Evil. If anything, we're actually a little bit more worried about that because 'cause we've already seen the wonderful Charles Soule comics, and we've seen Vader Immortal. That's like, are we just rethreading stuff? Like, does that make sense, right? Maul Shadow Lord? Okay, I'll give it to you. I think we're all kinda hyped for that just because animated Maul has been fantastic, but you go back to, like, 2011 when he was first being reintroduced after his character is literally bisected in episode 1. Everyone's like, "Why is he coming back?" Like, it doesn't make sense. Sure, it didn't, but then the story and the writing was great, and Stan Witwer delivered on making him such a very, very complicated a Sisyphus character who just constantly is failing upwards and continuing to fall down again and again and again, right? Right? If we had simply had that prevalent opinion in 2011, like, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense," right? Then we would have missed out on all this fantastic stuff, right? And then, you're looking at something like Mando and Grogu. If anything, I think that's actually a bit mixed for a lot of people. We personally do not love that title. It doesn't seem that great. Season 3 had a lot of mixed baggage for a lot of people, and obviously, since season 2, Mando, that whole Mandoverse has been very up and down for a lot of people. Is this gonna reclaim it? There's rumors of, like, a whole trilogy coming out of it. Do people even want that? Is it 2020 anymore? Not really, it's been a half decade, right? So all the things that you're saying, right? Like, I'm not disagreeing you per se. I'm just pointing out how people will point to a couple things that you're super excited for and have the same sentiment that you're having about Ray. And oh, like we don't want to see a Ray New Jedi Order film. The Star Wars fans these days will find something that they don't like in every era because there's just that much storytelling. So I get it. I understand if you don't think that the writing will be good enough around Ray as a character. I think that's totally fair. I think if you don't like the sequels, you're not gonna be confident in anything moving forward with her. But to say Daisy herself, I have to push back on that. An actor there are so many great actors who are stuck with terrible films for, like, decades of their career, and then suddenly they break out simply because they got paired with the right director, with the right writers, and it changes their whole perception, right? I don't like the feeling of saying, like, "Okay." And I know you said Ray, right, to be fair. Yeah, no to the Ray movie, that's fine, but yeah, I think we have to just wait and see, and I mean, that's kinda the whole discussion that we're having here, like, they're building out the era first before they even come to the New Jedi Order. It was a cool, exciting thing to have her reintroduced on stage, and there's definitely a lot of love for her at Celebration. I think people genuinely like her performance less so than the character per se, but yeah, I mean, we're not saying it's happening next, right? If anything, we're gonna see Starfighter and see if that works. If Starfighter doesn't work, then we're in a little bit more trouble. Like, is this era even gonna be fruitful for actually building out the future of Star Wars? Because at some point we have to move ahead. I personally, though, would not wanna push to 125, 200 ABY. That just seems like way too big of a leap. I'd rather, even if I don't love everything about the sequels, I'd rather have it be like how the prequels and original trilogy work. There is a gap of like 20, 30 years, 10 years, a couple years in between each film, and then another 30-year gap between originals and the sequels. If you were suddenly to jump 100 years, it'd be way too disconnected. I'd rather it be like 6 movies here, 6 movies there. I don't wanna feel like, "Okay, this is like an abandoned trilogy, and then we're gonna restart. 10 to 12 is great, and then we're gonna do 13 to 15." Like, that doesn't I I don't know, it doesn't rhyme like how George does. It doesn't feel circular. It'd feel too disconnected for me personally. And at that point, like, okay, like, which character could we even bring back from the sequels? Like, are we gonna just abandon so much potential for Finn that has been wasted. I don't want to do that. Are we gonna abandon Poe, who's, he's a good actor. Oscar Isaac is an Oscar level actor. I don't want that's actually kind of funny, Oscar level actor, Oscar. But, I don't wanna lose out on some great actors who now have the opportunity to get what the original trilogy actors never got, to actually build out their characters and see them, portray them for decades to come, hopefully, right? That's just me. I fully agree writing needs to be improved, execution needs to be improved, but I push back against the idea that, like, we have to just abandon them. It's only been 5 years. Kids are growing up with this stuff, and they're already being a lot more positive about it than, we probably are, and when we were kids, we were fighting the good fight too for Hayden Christensen, for Ewan McGregor, for Natalie Portman and all their portrayals in the prequels, and George Lucas's very poor dialogue there. It's world building, excellent, but the dialogue, the execution, the CGI, there were so many criticisms. So, yes, I'm just waiting, and I'm hoping, like, maybe more people who are a little bit more on the fence start leaning towards that way, but again, it all depends on stuff like Starfighter. I fully agree with that, but saying no immediately, I push back on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's a never say never in Star Wars, especially from seeing what has happened with the prequel redemption over the last 10 years, right? Nothing can ever be counted out. And like you said, kids are growing up right now. I mean, I'm very intrigued because we talked about this for years. I'm so intrigued to see what the conversation is around the sequels in 10 years because you would think they would have the same rebirth as the prequels, but I think the thing that hampers that there's two things that hamper that. One is that Disney has abandoned them. They have not provided
Yeah.
consistent content like George Lucas did with the prequels where he was like it or not, that's all I'm going to make for you.
Yeah.
And then that kind of redeemed it because he shoved it down everybody's throat like, hey, we got the Clone Wars. We have two Clone Wars shows that are both going to star prequel characters. We're going to only write books that are connected to prequels. We're going to tie in the post Return of the Jedi stuff to prequels. We're going to do everything prequel, and it's going to be all prequels all the time, and you guys are going to like it. And eventually we all did, or most of us did. There are still plenty of people who didn't. But so you have that. Disney has not done that with the sequels. They have all completely abandoned them for 6 years now. We are getting our first thing post sequels this year with that Finn book that's coming out at the end of the year. And other than that, we've got nothing. So I
Yeah.
think that's a
Legacy of
big
Vader a little bit, but that's about it too, yeah.
yeah, that too. And I think that's kind of like creative to me, it's more creator driven than anything, honestly, because it's
Yeah.
like Charles Soule, he's got the license to do whatever he wants with Star Wars and the comics right now. But yeah, so we've got those two things. We have not seen any form of animated content, live action content, anything that has brought those characters back to the generations that are growing up with those movies. And so I think on the flip side, this generation that's been growing up since 2015 is so much more connected to the cyberspace than we were, as kids because internet was slow and internet was difficult and it was not the same thing. And so when you're surrounded by that internet conversation, you're surrounded by that negativity. I wonder how much of that constant negativity for this basically the entire formative years of this next generation pushes that agenda into people's minds. Because I'm not discounting that, we don't know the ages of all our people watching right now. We don't know the ages of people commenting. There are a lot of people who just comment and repeat the same things they've heard somebody say on YouTube over and over
Yeah.
again. They have
Oh, yeah.
no actual passion behind it. I'm not saying you guys in the chat are like that, but there's a lot of people who comment on random videos of ours or random videos or random polls or comments or whatever, and they just repeat the same thing they've heard a million times. And so it's going to be a really interesting next 10 years to see if the sequels ever do get that redemption arc. And I think what's interesting, Anthony, especially with what you're saying as Ray as an albatross, I mean, she is in a way that like the sequels are. They're a very difficult barrier. You have to overcome that or you have to ignore it. And I'm kind of I'm I think what you're saying, Anthony, and what Jackson kind of says a little bit as well is just that the easiest thing to do for sure is to jump in time and just be like, no, we're not dealing with that. We'll deal with it in one day, or we'll let writers deal with it in books or something like that. We're just going to ignore it and we'll start over. And they could, and they absolutely could do that. And I think it would make a lot of sense to do that from a business standpoint. I think it would be just the easiest direction. But sometimes you do get diamonds from the roughest rocks. You get
Yeah,
pressure creates diamonds, and sometimes you could have something great that you didn't know you could get because they actually push through something that's very difficult.
yeah.
And so
Mhm.
it's interesting because big budget filmmaking isn't always centered around how do we make this incredible masterpiece that could redeem these characters? It's more like how do we please the most people so that they'll come watch our movie? And that's not a bad. I'm not saying that disparagingly. That's the business model of Hollywood. It's a business. They have to get the most people in the theaters as possible. And so, to me, honestly, it shows a little bit more fortitude that they're trying to push through with it because if they really wanted to just say, "Hey, what's the easiest buck we can make?" It is go beyond and have Luke appear to somebody as a Force ghost who lives, basically legacy-esque, who lives 200 years past Return of the Jedi, and you have Luke there, and you have maybe Adam Driver because he's a little bit more well-liked versus Daisy Ridley show up once in a while. You have these elements that people are familiar with. You can bring back Ewan McGregor or Hayden Christensen as Force Ghost. You could do that and like bring that spirit to something new. And I'm not saying they shouldn't try that. I think they should at some point because at some point it is going to get to the point where it's a little stale because you're going to have to come up with ideas of like, okay, how do we the First Order's too similar to the Empire. The Resistance is too similar to the Rebellion. How do we create new conflicts and differentiate our time period from the Legends time period, from the time period we had before with the New Republic? It's just going to kind of become a period where you can't have as much imagination. I feel like if you stick in this era, it's going to be very different. It's going to take a long time, in other words, to get to that point. And so we'll see if jumping far into the future, they could maybe have a little bit more creativity and imagination, and there's room for both types of stories. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that is very intriguing to me as they come up in the future, as we continue to see this, because really, from a business standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to return to these characters or this era if the next generation truly doesn't have a passion for it the way our generation had a passion for the prequels. So it'll be very intriguing to see what they do. I'm still hoping they at least try one more time to tell a compelling story. That's why I think the Ray movie specifically makes more sense than like let's plan a whole new trilogy and like
Right.
make sure we do a bunch more movies that nobody's that interested in. Let's try it once. And if it works, great, do more. If it doesn't work, then okay, that was the last vestiges of a failed attempt to bring this legacy back to these characters, but we should probably move on. And that's the great thing about it is it's open-ended and you can move on. And even if the Ray movie is the biggest dumpster fire yet, you can move on and go other than tarnishing your brand, you can move on to into the future and tell a story that takes place 200 years from now without this story really mattering in the grand scheme of that story, that
Yeah.
takes place in the future. So, it's very intriguing, the possibilities around this whole thing.
And the thing I would add, like, yes, I actually would love to see the post sequel era and 100 years happen almost concurrently, right? Like, just be like, yeah, let's just build out different eras. But we're seeing Disney struggle with doing that, with jumping to like the High Republic and trying to make that happen with the Acolyte, right? It seemed like everything was working right. They got Cobb Vanth, a character from an interlude from an early canon book to show up in Mandoverse. And it seemed like, okay, man, you're like really connecting all these different eras, different mediums. Everything is working. Everything is working, right? But Acolyte clearly didn't work. It just got canceled. It's the first ever Star Wars thing to be canceled, really, besides the Clone Wars because of the Disney purchase and all that. But yeah, and I understand like the idea of like coming entirely new characters jumping 100 years. Star Wars is definitely a brand that you can pull that off with. But that's not how the industry is anymore. Hollywood is not like it was when the original Star Wars came out, right? When original Star Wars came out, it was new Hollywood. It was the studio system had collapsed. They were begging for these new voices, Right now, we're unfortunately in a very, very dry period for Hollywood where a lot of these companies are not run by creative-minded CEOs. They're run as asset management companies. They're worried more about, like, public perception, online discourse, and all that, and, yes, that's always been a thing, but that's become such a big, big thing for them that they're so risk averse. So, why would it make sense for them to necessarily throw out whole new characters, right? It you can say that these sequel characters are tarnished. That's up to people's debates, that's subjective. But the fact of the matter is they're still the most recognizable thing that Disney has with Star
Mhm.
Wars. You can't just throw away something that you know that if we execute this better, if we give proper stories, if we flesh out the era, people will be like, "Oh, yeah, I saw that as a kid. I wanna just, go through that," right? So, like, yeah, right? Like, that makes sense. And yes, I agree, Anthony, Acolyte is not a good High Republic representation. That was a mistake in general, trying to connect it when it feels so different. But still, you're not gonna abandon these sequel characters when they're known assets, and for with every film studio right now being so risk averse, suddenly saying, "Here are all these new characters, here's a new generation of Skywalkers," or something without explaining how the Skywalkers are still alive, right? Because Rey's an adopted Skywalker, right? There's gonna be so many different questions that'll jump up to people and confuse them. I mean, let's be frank, when 2016 Rogue One came out, everybody's on a high and all that. The amount of people who would ask me, "Is Rogue One a sequel to The Force Awakens?" was baffling. It was baffling, but that's the thing, a general audience member does not know all this stuff. They'll know stuff that they've already seen, and all these film studios, unfortunately today, are just like, "Okay, we know this is established, good or bad, we're just gonna make it work again." You can reboot things. You really can't in Star Wars. It has chosen not to. We've done one reboot. People have not loved that, but they've accepted it because it was Disney taking over. Doing that again, and, it's just no, it's just logically not there. Unfortunately, that's just the state of the industry, and, are kids gonna grow up loving become young adults and be like, "Oh, man, I love the sequels?" It's also a little bit hampered by the fact that the Disney Plus era had taken over. Right now, we're talking about how streaming is
Yeah.
dead and
Yeah.
everything, but there was so much content from 2020 to this year with Andor. This is the first real pause that we've had in 5 years. And kids who are growing up who could have had more time to, like, see novels, video games, comics, and everything flood out of the sequels have instead gotten this New Republic era happening at the same
Mhm.
time, if not overtaking it. So they might have actually a lot more nostalgia for that and then be more open to the Mando and Grogu film becoming a whole trilogy. It's complicated right now, but at the end of the day, those are still assets that they know are successful at the box office, successful at the numbers, successful in people's perception of, like, when they think of modern Star Wars. Jumping 100 years, I want that to happen, but we've already seen, like, if it's not properly executed, if we're jumping around to different eras and it doesn't really connect to a general audience, or if it doesn't connect to the hardcore fans like ourselves, it's not gonna go anywhere like the Acolyte. So, yeah, we'll see. We will see, but yeah, I it'll be interesting, and one little comment on Eclipse, Eclipse is not gonna be made. I'm telling you right now, that's the biggest lie that Star Wars has ever told it. That whole trailer was a complete falsity. They admitted it, like, 2 years later. None of that is real.
Well, and I think you're right, specifically, like, piggybacking off your point and combining it with what I was saying too about shelving this era as well, is I do genuinely think they shifted all that goodwill and momentum that was there with Force Awakens and Rogue One into The Mandalorian and into that era. And I think
Yeah,
it goes back to an age-old conversation about what is Star Wars, right? For a lot of people, Anthony, you're saying you're a first generation Star Wars fan, probably you, and for anybody who grew up between, probably the late 60s and the early 90s, Star Wars was only the original trilogy, and then you've had to adjust to each new thing that's being added. And then after a while, maybe the prequels start to feel like Star Wars to you eventually because there's so much of it. But I think one of the reasons that prequels can eventually feel like Star Wars to a lot of people is that it just feels that you have that auteurist George Lucas stamp on it. which all the new stuff won't have. But The Mandalorian has that because it's a part of that similar time period. It's made in that same vibe. It's made in that same vein. It's the Empire versus the Rebels, even or the Empire versus the New Republic. It's that same kind of classic Star Wars story. And so it goes back to the age-old question about what is Star Wars and how do you continue with Star Wars in the future? Because to a lot of people, Rey, those characters aren't Star Wars. What was at the heart of Star Wars was the Skywalkers, and they fumbled that story. And instead of having a nice transition where, like, really, we should be at the point where if they would have done it right, 7, 8, and 9 are about Luke, Han, Leia. And at the end of 9, you feel comfortable enough with Rey, Finn, and Poe that they can be handed off to the next generation, and they're the leaders of 10, 11, 12. That would have been kind of the ideal baton pass because we never have the true legacy passing to these characters. It's more in the like, oh, the our heroes show up as a guide to these three, but they're not chosen by our heroes. They're not part of the hero's family like they were in Legends. They're not, part of the story. They get enveloped in the story, and then the heroes by proxy are there to pass on their knowledge and wisdom, but they never truly like pass the torch. I think that's one of the things they messed up, but it makes that era and those characters feel a little less Star Wars innately because they're not as tied to the centric piece of Star Wars that started everything, which is what the prequels are tied to, which is what the original EU was tied to. It was all kind of pulling towards that Skywalker core of Han, Luke, and Leia, and so that's another weird thing, and I think that's why Mandalorian has hit so well. And I do think because it's crazy to think about that season one of Mandalorian came out only 4 years after The Force Awakens. That like it's in the same generation of kids who are growing up. It's in the same generation of people to where like that's far more successful, and it's now lasted longer both in real world time and in actual in universe time. That story has lasted longer. We've been with The Mandalorian and Grogu since 2019, and it's now 2025, and we're getting a new film in 2026. So that'll be 7 years of having Mandalorian and Grogu as a centerpiece of Star Wars, kind of the icon of Star Wars, versus the sequels were only kind of the icon of Star Wars for 4 years, and then they let him go. And so I think it's really just an interesting way they handled this whole thing to see how certain pieces come into the fold. But I truly do feel like Mandalorian is now their most bankable franchise. It's their most iconic characters, and even though general movie going audiences know Ray, Finn, and Poe, there's still just so much divisive conversation around them that it's a tough bet if you're going to invest 250 million, $300 million in a movie. Are we going to see even half of that return? Is it worth the devaluation of the brand, or is it worth, if even if it's a great movie, is it worth the loss of the money to try to make this work again, or do we just pack up, go home, and be like, let's bank
Yeah.
on Mandalorian, or let's bank on something brand new? And I don't. Star Wars is such an interesting position, and I think you can ask 100 people on the street, and 99 of them will tell you different answers on how they would want to see it handled. So that's just
Yeah.
it's a no-win situation they're in. They're gonna have to figure something out with this. But yeah, it's a fun conversation to have. I mean, we have these conversations. We go back to the Ray movie, Rise of Skywalker. All that stuff seems to happen every single stream, but it's still an interesting conversation because it's just such a we've never had a period of Star Wars like this that feels so open-ended, feels like it has so many things going on at once. Because before Disney, it was just Lucas saying, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and everybody's going to follow me. um, and Disney is as in a lot of good ways given us the opportunity to broach so many different eras of high quality, high budget storytelling, but yet um, the one era that they would love you to love is the one that is the most divisive. And
Yeah.
so that's the really interesting thing about moving forward, because they do have equity in the theme parks with these characters. They do have these actors in a young age, and an age where they're still prolific. It's a very intriguing concept. I think we got to move into the rest of these questions because we definitely We've talked about these specifically for 50 minutes. um, but we'll
Yeah.
move it back to the top. And again, we'll get to Jackson and Anthony some of your further comments because we've tried to pull in a lot of what you're saying into our conversation here. We'll get to some of the further points you guys make in a little bit, but I think we got to go back and top to the top in fairness to those people who did comment first. And again, the way we structure our Q&As here on the channel is that we are a first come first serve channel. You get your comment in first, you get priority. However, if you send in a super chat, helps our channel, supports our channel, we do answer your comment before any other comments. You can also join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you sign up for the $5 tier, the $4.99 tier, which is the Rebel tier, you get priority chat access on YouTube. It will tell you you have priority chat access. You can access that feature on Patreon. You can either tell us your YouTube handle via the comments of the post we have on Patreon, or you can DM us on Patreon. Tell us your YouTube handle so we prioritize you, or you can just comment your thoughts, your comment that you want to put in the live stream chat on the YouTube or the Patreon post on Patreon. And then you can comment there, and we'll keep checking to make sure if anybody comments there to prioritize yours. All right, let's get into the first question. I did post the room a lot earlier today for you guys. I wanted to see how many people noticed because the last few weeks I've been posting it the chat room about an hour and a half before the stream. Today I posted it like 11 in the morning, so you guys had a lot more time to comment early. Rebel Sith 18, who Rebel Sith, you comment almost every stream. We really appreciate that. That you always miss the stream. Hopefully you're here tonight joining us for the stream. If not, hopefully you see this when you watch the replay and get to hear your questions answered for the first time. Rebel Seth 18 says, just finished Trials of the Jedi. So happy, my favorite character. Okay, so we don't want to get into too many spoilers, but so I won't read this completely out loud, I guess, in case a lot of you haven't seen it yet. Let me read it mentally first, and then I'll answer certain parts of it. Uh, Yeah, so you bring up a lot of really interesting points. So I mean, I consider these semi-light spoilers, but I think they are spoilers nonetheless. So I don't want to go too deep into it. Again, Rebel Sith, we will be doing a full live stream about Trials, and so just for the sake of people who have not yet gotten a chance to read the book, because it's only been out for a week today,
Yeah.
we don't want to give too much away. But so bring back some of these ideas. But all I'll say, I guess, for now, is that I think you have really cool ideas. I can't wait to see more of these characters as well, because I think there's a lot of stories in this like next epilogue phase of the High Republic that they could be doing. That these two in particular have probably the most rich storytelling left to tell.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So if you're gonna keep going with the High Republic, there aren't too many characters that survive trials that I'm like, yes, I need more of their story. Like I think it's gonna be more like certain characters that survive, I think will fall more into that Acolyte for an Extra book we just got, where it's like, yeah, it's an all right, like random side adventure, but it doesn't really matter, especially having just read this huge, you know, life changing initiative for these characters. What stories can we really tell about certain ones that are really going to matter to that point? But I think the dynamic between these two, it's strong enough and compelling enough and interesting enough that it can carry a book on its own, and you don't need crazy cool villains or epic events to happen. Like you can just have great character dynamics between these two, and it will absolutely carry more stories. So can't wait to see them, and I can't wait to talk further about your specific spoiler points in a stream we are going to be doing.
Yeah, same boat as Liam. I'd love to speak more on it, but it's really not something we can right now. Just so you know, in the fairness for other people who are definitely catching up, especially because as we've talked about in our lives and on a lot of our video reviews too, it really does feel like because of how Phase 3 was stretched out, people are kinda almost struggling to catch up because it's just there's these big gaps. Phase 1 and it was like the opposite. It was like almost flooded and you're like, "Okay, but I'm at home right now. It's COVID." Like everyone's still kinda like dealing with lockdowns and everything. Might as well order the book or read it on my ebook or listen to audiobooks, right? And everyone's just in, and especially because it's fresh and new, you're way more locked in on all that stuff. So, yeah, let's hold off on that. You do bring some very interesting points. I think that Phase 4 slash Phase More, whatever they've been talking about, all the authors, I think there'll be some really fascinating things. I also wouldn't be surprised if we don't necessarily get all the current writers kind of continuing it forward. We know Justina Ireland's done, I believe, after Wayseeker, and she's written so much for the High Republic in general. So I think she's kind of done with Vernestra, which is a bit of a shame because Vernestra has a lot of story that needs to be filled out, so I do wonder who would, like, take over per se. But Reeth and Aslan, especially Aslan, the way he's developed from Phase 2 to here, again, a character that I didn't necessarily think I was forced into Phase 3, but I was like, "How are we gonna play him out?" And he's he's definitely one of the most rewarding characters so far, and Trials gave him a fascinating end. And Reed, like we've been talking about, yeah, he had a great Phase 3. I mean, George Mann absolutely elevated him as a character. A great, great fun time. So we will talk about this more on the live. I think that live is also going to cover a little bit more of just our overall thoughts on the High Republic. We'll start doing character tier lists and all this other stuff for the High Republic as a full closeout. Like I said at the start of the stream, we're going to also be doing, like, finishing off some of these different reviews that we still have. Like Valiant Vow is going to come out as a short. I wanna get to those Audible, exclusive audiobooks too that really deal with the Drengir and everything that connects Into the Light. We still have the manga, the Edge of Balance mangas, and just the Fear of the Jedi comics. There's a lot that we will cover in the next couple weeks here before we, have that final big real talk about Trials of the Jedi. But yeah, keep that excitement up because I know other people are gonna be catching up and finishing the book and definitely have a lot of the same, like, joy and, like, hype for what comes next.
Yes, I definitely agree, and I'm very excited to talk about because like Trials, you guys saw if you saw our review, I mean, we both really, really liked it. I think it's one that like the longer you sit with, definitely gets even better. But still, there's still some open-ended things that as we continue to wrap up everything, and I'm still catching up on some of the other stuff too. Like I was behind on comics for a little bit. I caught completely up, and then I fell behind a little bit, so I'm catching up on the rest of those. And I'm working on Valiant Vow right now. I've finished the other junior novels and stuff too, so we're like almost done with everything. But as we continue to wrap up the rest, it just still the book continues to get better and better, and there's certain things definitely want to talk about. So I can't wait for that stream. Might need a couple streams honestly to get
Yeah.
everything in. Freezy2324 sent us a super chat. Thank you so much, Freezy, for sending in that super chat. Freezy says, "Will we ever get a Luke Skywalker focused Clone Wars style animated show? I feel like the fans of it would eat it up, and it could maybe help the sequel trilogy." Freezy, we've been talking about this forever, and I would love it. I definitely think it would be a, a huge benefit to them. I mean, you have two big assets right now that are specifically reasons to do it within the next 5 to 10 years. One is that the conversation around the sequel trilogy is very low. If you have this Ray movie coming out, one of the things I've talked about in the past as a reason why I think the sequel trilogy is incredibly hard to fix. I mean, besides the reasons we've talked about tonight in detail tonight, is just the fact that the whole trilogy takes place over the course of 1 year. So there's no gaps really to explore. And we've explored that 1 year gap in quite a few things, whether it be Rise of the Resistance, the ride at Disneyland, whether it be Smuggler's Run, the rise at Disneyland, whether it be the really, really bad, what was it, Allegiance or
Allegiance, yeah.
Alliances or something like that, comic
Yeah.
miniseries. And then Resistance Reborn, which I found very underwhelming for what it could have been. So we haven't done much, and we've actually told quite a few stories in that era or that year. So that really the only way to truly fix it, I think, is to add stakes to what that year means. And it's to tell the stories that happened before. It's to give us stories with Han, Luke, and Leia. It's to give us stories with Kylo Ren and Ben Solo and his fall and really elevate the stakes of all of that stuff. So, Freezy, yes, we should get it. Will we get it anytime soon? I don't know. I don't think it would be Clone Wars style. I think it would be more Rebels style, not in terms of like specific animation style. I don't know if you're talking about you want like Clone Wars animation style or if you want Clone Wars structure, but I don't think Clone Wars structure would work the best for Luke's New Jedi Order. I think a linear story would work a little bit better. Um, and you would have to tell multiple era or multiple different you could have multiple different year jumps, but I think centering it around Ben Solo, what he learns, his lessons, his growth, his progression, and having Luke, kind of be there to be involved in that story, that would kind of be the ideal version of it. The second thing I wanted to mention with that, the big asset you have is you have one of the more acclaimed voice actors of the last 30 years is Luke Skywalker. Mark Hamill, who played the Joker forever, has played a variety of major characters on television in animated roles. He was an Avatar. He was in so many big, high profile animated shows, and he still loves voice acting. And you have him here to do Luke Skywalker and make it feel as Luke Skywalker as possible. Now, is Mark Hamill essential for an animated Luke Skywalker? No, but you have him and it gives some authenticity to the character, just like when James Earl Jones came back and did Vader for Rebels. It just gives a little bit of authenticity, even if they don't sound exactly like maybe their younger selves should. So I think you have those two things right there. It makes so much sense. I don't know what they're waiting for on that one specifically. And I've also suggested that you could even do it live action. I think Ben Solo is the most difficult thing to work around, but Mark Hamill's still in pretty good shape. He's in his 70s, but he can, he's fit, he's capable, he can walk well, he can do it. He's been in a lot of live action stuff in the last few years as well, random movies. Um, he can do it. And you could do a live action Fall of Ben Solo there if you wanted to, and have that be the capper to the animated show, or have that be the start, and then tell the flashbacks, all the early stuff in the animated show. Like you could do that, and I don't know why they're not doing it. And it wouldn't really connect. Like we've talked about the recast versus animation in the past with what you do with the original trilogy characters in the New Republic era. This would be a type of story that you wouldn't even it wouldn't matter if you made that decision or not, like you could tell this story without having to decide on that future. If you did it in animation in the early years and you did live action in the later years, it still leaves you room to tell stories in live action if you didn't want to do recasts. So we shall see, but appreciate your super chat, Freezy, and thanks for the question. I would very much so like to see it.
Yes, I would love it. Um, I've also spoken about how I want to see a little bit more new animation too in general. Like it's nice that we're getting the ninth Jedi, or yeah, it's Ninth Jedi, right? That's what it's called. Yeah, the Ninth Jedi
Yeah.
anime Vision standalone series. That's not gonna be canon anyways, just its own little thing, right? I think Star Wars was already ready to go for full anime, but I'll take it as like a bridge. But yeah, I want a whole new animation style. I think it's nice to have almost like each era be defined by animation in a different way, in a different look. Like, yeah, Rebels was definitely a cheaper show, but it was very Ralph McQuarrie inspired, right? With very thin lightsabers, right? You're going with kind of the textures. You're taking old designs and bring them back, right? And I'd love to see like them just like eat up on all the concept art and stuff that they do have that never really got into the films. There's so much around 2013, 2014 pre The Force Awakens being released, that's fascinating to look at, and I'm sure they still have stuff for that for, like, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker that never really came in because of such tight windows that Iger really enforced on Kennedy and enforced on JJ. So, yeah, I'd love to see, this show in some sort of animated medium. Definitely not a Tales of, like, shortish show. No, it needs to be a proper season's worth, at least 16 episodes like Bad Batch. Like, it should not be anything less than that. And it'll be nice because I think this is one of the shows where you can genuinely tell a story for like this certain like 10 years after, Battle of Jakku. Then you can jump 17 years after, then you can jump 23 years. Like, you can take these rather significant jumps between seasons, and it will work really well. So, arc structure like the Clone Wars, no. Season jumps, absolutely. I think that's a possibility, and that still allows us to, maybe get like some cool moments in some other movie or TV show where Mark Hamill and like is a little de-aged and shows up, right? And you can fill in some interesting flashbacks, you can tell more books and comics, even video games even. We need Luke's Jedi Order in my mind. I ideally would love to have seen it be done concurrently with Rey's, so you can see like what are the differences, what were some of the failures that he had, what are some of the failures Rey's having. It'd be nice, almost like how they're like responding and interacting with each other. Because in the same way, how art is always sometimes like a reflection and a conversation between different artists and all that. I would think the Jedi, in a lot of ways, with their philosophies, with how fundamentally Palpatine destroyed their organization and everything, and how Luke is kinda coming up as trying to do everything right, but then also very prequel and oriented, and then Rey's like, "No, I Luke never showed me any of that. He was just an angry old man for a lot of the time there," right? Like, it'd be very interesting to see what he shows, what she's taking from those old ancient Jedi texts, what he was taking from those, and why he was still so swayed by, like, what he learns and uncovers about his father and all that. There's a ton of great things to say, and I know Mark Hamill recently has been saying, "Oh, we should move away from Luke and all that." Sure, maybe in live action, I get that, but Mark, you've done, like, literally everything in animation, and, like, one of my favorite animated characters of his is Skips from Regular Show. Like, it's just a random weird role that he played for, like, 8, 9 years. You're telling me you can't do 3, 4 seasons of, like, a Luke's Jedi Order, which is fundamental, and which is a version of Luke that, at least for the first half, will be like that EU version, the optimistic hero that you believe in, that you've always read him as, right? And again, Mark Hamill has always been kind of wishy-washy on the character too. He wanted Luke to have a very different ending for Return of the Jedi. He wanted him to have a very different ending for Force Awakens. He's been a little scattered in his own opinions over the years, the different conversations that he's had, but I would absolutely agree with the point that he wants to still see that positive Luke, the one that trained that order and all that. We all wanna see that, right? We wanna see that, and then we also wanna see how Snoke infiltrated Ben's mind and the effect that could have and what he was resisting and fighting against his nephew inadvertently. I wanna see how Palpatine's hands are, like, controlling Snoke's minds at different point, which is then controlling, obviously everything going on with Ben in his head, like the voices in his head that are just confusing and all that. I wanna see how the Vader voice is used against him, right? Like, there's so many fascinating things that you can show with these 2 as the main protagonists and still let Luke, for at least the first half of the story, be more of that lead before you transition more into Ben's slow eventual decay and fall and from his mental state, from his place with his family, from his place in the galaxy as a Jedi and all that, right? There's fascinating storytelling I think that can happen with these gaps that still allow for other stories to fill it in, like how Shadow the Sith has done so far. So, absolutely would eat it up. I think for sure it will help the sequel trilogies because you can span it over 30 years. You don't have to make this the only defining part about Luke's Jedi Order, but you can make this central and crucial to everything, right? I still think we can pull off some live action stuff with maybe some of his other students and all that can kind of pop up, right? Maybe some old comic characters, right, can pop up here that are getting introduced in like the current New Republic line or something, right? There are plenty of ways to do that and still have Mark maybe cameo here and there without him being a huge player live action wise. But for his story as the leader of the order, animation, come on. Like there's no way that they can't do it. I think it'll be fascinating. I think it'll be fun. Do I think there should be some material in that 1 year that can kinda override Allegiance and build up all the other stuff that is decent, like, Resistance Reborn and all these rides? Absolutely, but it makes way more sense to flesh out that 30-year gap because people, even if you like, Luke's portrayal in The Last Jedi, and I do, I know Liam doesn't totally love it, I still wanna understand it, right? And that's always
Mhm.
been the biggest thing. It's the same thing we saw with Vernestra. We don't understand how after 100 years, she's so different. She's so embedded into, like, middle management of the Jedi Order when you're reading her in the High Republic, and she's anything but that. She's distrustful. She's seen her master fall and all that. Like, it becomes important when you take these big gaps to actually explain them. It's not like it is between, the original trilogy and the prequels where you're going back and you already know the story. We don't know the story at all. Like, we know the conclusion of it, sure, in the same way that we did with the prequels, but we don't know the prequel story yet of Luke and what he achieved, all that. We're only getting a very disheartened version of him telling that. If anything, there might be incredible amounts of survivors or people who split off philosophically and became, like, light side users or maybe, like, the modern version of, like, the Fel Empire's Imperial Knights or something. There could be so many people that he influenced in such positive ways that he didn't necessarily agree with or were with him. but we don't know that because we really don't know anything about his order. We literally just have the rise of Kylo Ren as a visual and Shadow of the Sith. That's it. That's really it. So, absolutely think that should happen. I want it to be Mark Hamill. I'll understand if it's somebody else, if that means that we get more seasons and more story out of it, right? But it should happen, and I think if with the timeline of the Rey's New Jedi Order being so wishy-washy right now, if they don't do that as, like, their next big show after, like, Maul Shadow Lord, especially with now how they're ramping up a lot of the sequel era content, you're missing out on the chance to, like, build up a lot of stuff that then allows the New Jedi Order film to be a reaction to build off of and see what are the differences while still honoring Luke still had a successful order for at least 25 years.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even in Rise of Kylo Ren, it's indicated that Kylo didn't start the fire. He didn't blow up
No,
the temple, and so all these younglings who died, or these Padawans who died or disappeared, like we don't know if they all died. There might be hundreds who lived and left. So there's so much to tell, so much you can change and like manipulate into whatever story you want that it's really open ended. So it would be a great place to go. Thanks for that super chat. Appreciate your support of the channel and appreciate the question. Critical Thinker says thoughts on Tomasi's Superman run. I thought it was a great return to form after New 52 as well as actual progression in status quo for Superman. Wasn't a fan of what Bendis did after though. Agree with both points. I thought it was a really, really good run. I really liked what he did. And Tomasi in general is just one of the most underrated DC writers. For those of you who maybe are interested in Green Lantern by Jeff Johns, to me, it's almost essential to read the Tomasi Green Lantern core stuff that goes right with it. It's so, so good. And it's not as, epic as the Jeff Johns stuff, but it is a lot more fun, a lot more kind of space fantasy, whereas the Green Lantern Jeff Johns stuff gets a little bit darker, more into the different ring colors and emotions, all that stuff. So definitely recommend Tomasi's run on Superman. I actually think it's one that will probably pair with the film version a little bit better than what Bendis did because Bendis was very controversial just in general with some of the things he did and changed about the lore around what Tomasi started. And then the Super Sun stuff and all that. It was great time for those characters. But Bendis hasn't had a huge hit in a long time, and his Superman was kind of no different. But definitely recommend it if people are looking for like a more modern Superman run that's a little bit closer to the core of what that character is from like the things that Superman, the James Gunn movie, seems to be pulling from.
Yeah, what
um,
Liam said.
Critical Thinker also says if Disney asked you to adapt the EU as a non-canon series like Visions, how would you structure it? What form of media? How many seasons or films? What would you add, remove? Well, the EU, that can't be a show or a movie. Like it can't. The whole EU is too big.
No.
So you would have to take parts of it, and could be a variety of different things. Um, but if you were talking about like I feel like what most people think of when they think of the EU is just everything post Return of the Jedi. That's what most people think of when they think of like what the true EU was, because everything else has kind of like a name, right? It's Old Republic, or it's Clone Wars, or it's prequel era. So EU is kind of the only thing of that time period. Like we were just talking about Luke's New Jedi Order and stuff in canon, right? We don't really have any of that stuff in canon, but we had this huge long 3-decade long amount of story post Return of the Jedi for those characters in Legends. So you're talking about the post Return of the Jedi stuff. If it was non-canon, again, I'll say the same thing. I would just if it was not a part of the Star Wars universe at all, I would recast and I would just retell those stories almost the exact same way, skipping a lot of the fluff from the 90s and just kind of going Thrawn trilogy into maybe like a alternate take on Dark Empire, not fully Palpatine returning, but like, something that gets Anakin Solo obviously being born and then gets that stuff kind of rolling, gets Luke's new Jedi Order going. So you do Thrawn trilogy, you do Jedi Academy, then you would kind of, in my opinion, just jump straight into like Corellian trilogy or Black Fleet Crisis. I don't think you need to do all of those trilogies, but maybe one or two of them. I think Corellian trilogy would probably be the best one, just because of how important the Corellians are just in general
Yeah.
to the EU. Um, but there's stuff in both of them that do impact New Jedi Order. But I think I would skip Black Fleet Crisis and then go into Hand of Thrawn, and then you do New Jedi Order, and then you would do, I guess Survivor's Quest would be in there as well. New Jedi Order, Legacy. You can skip Dark Nest, Legacy of the Force, then Fate of the Jedi, and then come up with a new ending for it all. But I think if that's what you're looking at, I think you could tell that in a series of films. Um, I would do it films because I think those characters, like that could be such an epic story that you could tell. I mean, obviously you'd have to condense New Jedi Order dramatically. Obviously, you'd have to kind of maybe condense the time period as well so that there's not so much time in between. But if you casted if you casted like late 20 something, early 30 something actors as Han, Luke, and Leia in this like hypothetical non-canon alternate timeline, not legends, not canon, just like it's an adaptation timeline basically. If you casted late 20 something, early 30 something actors, hypothetically they could both grow into the roles and you could age them up. It's a lot easier to age somebody up than age somebody down. So if you wanted to get into like 50-year-old Luke Skywalker, you could age that actor up into 50-year-old Luke Skywalker. You don't have to age them down. So Critical Thinker at the bottom says, uh, yeah, you pitched something like that in a video a year ago, so I'm referring to your ideas for that. Yeah, and basically, I mean, I still hold by it. Pretty much everything I said in that video, and I still think it's a worthwhile endeavor, right? Because I know people disagree with me on the recasting, but I think what works about recasting for an alternate timeline is just that it feels completely different, right? Like, yeah, you still want it to have the spirit of Han, Luke, and Leia, but it tells the audience this is a different timeline. This is a different take, right? Because it's not Mark Hamill, it's not Harrison Ford, it's not Carrie Fisher. So that to me would immediately be the first visual cue for this version, and you could call it the Star Wars expanded universe. You could literally call it the Star Wars EU, and people would understand that this is a separate timeline than the other timeline because they're not the same actors. And I think that's the best way to honestly have like a reboot of Star Wars without rebooting, because you're just telling stories in an alternate timeline and then you still have your main Star Wars timeline. And I'm not for timelines ever crisscrossing. Like, I don't want, multiverse stuff in Star Wars, but I think there's enough room there to tell different stories that are more experimental, more different in style. Han and Leia would have different kids, like everything would be different, and it would indicate that the general audiences that this is a different thing. And so I think it's definitely worth a shot. I would do it in films because I think that's the best way to do it. But if it got popular enough, then it would take over, right? You would have film, you would have TV, you'd have everything in there. But I would start it as film because I just think it's your chance to do big budget storytelling again with these characters, or with the core of these characters, and truly give people that adaptation of the EU that they've never gotten. But that's the less realistic opportunity. If they could get animated adaptations of these going, that'd be great too. But I just don't see animated adaptations really satisfying anybody, because it's just going to be animated adaptations. If you do it like DC, even if you put a little bit more money into it, it's just going to be like an 80-minute to 75 to 90-minute long condensed book. And most of these books are, 3, 4, 500 pages. It's not like a comic book where it's a visual medium, so you can adapt it a little bit more one to one. Books are very difficult to adapt into 2-hour movies, 3-hour movies, let alone an hour and 20-minute animated movie. So I feel like it might get the spirit of the story, but it's not going to fully satisfy those people. Live action film would be the best way to fully satisfy people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can't really add to this one because Liam has done a video and it's very comprehensive. So I agree, I mean, there are things in the Bantam era that I just don't love, right? Obviously, I would pick stuff like Crystal Star and all that, and that whole Barbara trilogy, like that you could
Yeah,
throw that away,
classic.
right? But like Liam said, everything with the Corellians, it becomes so important. The EU becomes so important to like things in New Jedi Order. It's literally the basis of Legacy of the Force, right? Like it's there are things that like because it was book only for so long, they have so much more depth, and in a way, it's almost more realistic because there's a whole galaxy of people doing crazy things. So, yeah, I would love movies of, like, the things that make sense from Bantam that could be combined. I mean, that relationship between Dark Empire and the Thrawn trilogy is yeah, it's fraught with tension, like, just even between the creatives, they did not like each other at a personal level, right? And it was at a time when they were both, like, allowed to do whatever they wanted. It just so happened to be that while they were both successful for their mediums, books have a little bit more visibility in the '90s, which, kinda shocks me a bit, but at the end of the day, Thrawn trilogy was all-time bestseller. Dark Empire was really good for a lot of people's interest in Star Wars, but it was like an addition to it. It wasn't necessarily like, "Wow, that's another huge big thing like that they expanded to." If not, we would have had way more comics in EU. We never really did until the prequel started coming out. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with, basically everything Liam's saying. Obviously, having a proper end would be nice. I like the legacy comics. My problem with them is that by the time we get to that point, stuff like Fell Empire and all that basically implies that Jaina, the sword of the Jedi, married into an empire, which is like the whole thing that her parents and uncle fought against, right? That her grandfather helped create. And like, yeah, it's a good empire. I don't like a lot of the imperial apologia that kind of comes about in the later EU. It works for the alliance portion, it's just once that alliance portion has kinda split off and everyone's kinda their own separate faction by legacy, you're just supposed to be like, "Yeah, the Fells are great," but I'm like, Soontir was still, like, an Imperial pilot, like, yeah, sure, he defected, all this and that, but he was still an Imperial ace and all that. Sure, his son is nice and all that, but there's so much of Legacy of the Force that's just excusing what Jagged has grown up in. Okay, Empire of the Hand, it's a little different, okay, sure, but I don't know, I don't actually hate them, I just hate the idea that Jaina is part of that, and I also am not the biggest fan of, Jason's final vision of seeing, like, Alana on the throne as, like, this Jedi queen. I don't love that after all these wars, we're suddenly gonna go into more like a feudalistic conclusion for Star Wars, in the EU, like, I think those are some interesting ideas. It's just that I know a lot of people almost clamor for seeing, like, that version happening, and I'm like, I don't know, and Legacy never really commits to it. Legacy Volume 2 is nowhere near that happening, right? That supposedly could be years later or something. It seems like something that they all liked. I also just don't know how I would balance out personally the conclusion of, like, the unifying force, the whole perspective on the force changing, and then by the end of Darkness, Crisis, and Legacy of the Force, it just goes back to the black and white that's more traditionally Star Wars and how it's explored the force, right? Like, that there were so many things in New Jedi Order that push the limits of what you expected from Star Wars and its philosophies, and then there's so much undoing, and I have to say it, I'm just not a fan of Troy Denning in general, especially once he became a huger voice as it came to the later EU. Nobody remembers Fate of the Jedi. Anybody says they really cared about Abeloth, they don't. They've watched a lot of YouTube videos and read Wikipedia. Most people cannot tell, like, the plot details of every single Fate of the Jedi book, especially with the Blade of Mortis and everything being involved, and the prequels kind of, like, shaping even more and more the further we're getting in the timeline, which can make sense at points, but not increasingly so, so I agree with a lot of what Liam's saying. Those are just how I would texture and contextualize some of my, worries about how would you do it. Those things I think would still have to change.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can the I guess the point of the exercise, like anything, um, that you would adapt into film, right, is you have to take the best and the worst, you have to condense, you have to adapt, and so it won't be one to one, but it would take the spirit of a very different Star Wars, right? I think that's just kind of the general point, and it was the point of my video too, is like, we have this entire universe of Star Wars stories that, just like any great novel series, is waiting to be adapted into film. And the reason they haven't done it is because it stars characters who are played by actors who are way too old to play those versions of the characters, right? Or in Star Wars's case, we lost one of the big three. So to me, like we've said in the past, like it was not ideal at all to adapt the EU for the sequel trilogy. Like I don't think what they did was a bad decision. The bad decision came in, I mean, we're not even talking about the actual structure of the films, but talking about the EU, the bad decision around the EU at that time was just saying, nope, it's done. No more adding to it. It's gone forever. That was the mistake. And I appreciated the intent behind that because they were going to try to keep a tighter ship. But we kind of all knew that wasn't going to happen. And they proved it almost immediately after The Force Awakens came out. There was already continuity errors in books and stuff, and then we pass that off as, "Oh, it's just novelizations," but, like, there were already problems right off the bat. So, I think that's the main thing is this thing that people invested 30 years into is just gone from the continuity, and you're not adding into it anymore, and so I think it was a mistake to completely negate that. Now, would it have been a horrible, horrible, horrible mistake and had so much fan backlash to recast in 2015? Yes, people would have been fuming. But I think today people are a little more open to it, not just because we've already ripped the band-aid off with Han Solo and Lando, but because people are generally a little bit more realistic about the fact that yes, all of our actors are the two that are living are in their mid to late 70s and mid to late 80s, and then Lando, even Billy D, is almost 90. So those three are way too old, to really be centerpieces of a Legends universe, right? They can come back and do their roles as needed. And obviously Harrison Ford's still working a lot, but they can't be the centerpieces of an entire EU story. So, in my opinion, like I just think, and especially God forbid, these actors pass away, but eventually they are going to. And, what do you do with those characters then? Like your only option is to recast. So it's a realistic possibility. Um, maybe, as they continue to get older and older, I think it becomes a more possible scenario that they actually do decide to recast. I think for now, it's like they're very much stuck in between. What do they do? But I agree with you, critical thinker. I'd rather have a good recast than just leaving those characters in the toy bin forever, both in canon and in Legends. You have such ripe material in Legends that would make for such fantastic stories that it seems like almost a waste to own this entire, like you're saying, Sonic, earlier, with like film studios becoming asset management and streaming service just being an arms race for collection of content. I mean, Star Wars owns one of, if not the, I think Star Trek probably is the only bigger science fiction book franchise. Like,
Yeah.
I can't think of any other science fiction book franchise that has 300 plus books, 300, 400 plus books. So Star Wars is a massive, like, it might not be as acclaimed as other science fiction franchises in terms of its writing, but it's a huge library of stories that you're just holding on to and not doing anything with on the film and TV side, and most companies would kill for that. So I anticipate it happening at some point. It's just a matter of what form they do it, and we shall see. But I think if you wait long enough, you let the sequel stench kind of fade. You let the like clamoring for those stories continue. You continue to blur the boundaries between what's canon and what's not. It's time. They've left it open for that possibility. So we shall see. But thanks for that question. Critical Thinker also says, where do you think Disney should take sequel trilogy characters going down the line? What do you want to see from Rey, Finn, Poe, or say Ransom Casterfo doing after the Rise of Skywalker? So I mean, I guess we kind of talked about Rey a lot earlier, but I think if you're going to double down with these characters, then go all in on what the lessons they should have or hypothetically did learn during the films, and keep pushing it forward. Rey has become this semi conduit of the light and the dark, rejecting her dark past for the light and embracing the name Skywalker. So as that character, I don't want to see her now a disgruntled, like, old Jedi like they just did with Luke. I want to see um her do the Luke stuff that we saw in the EU. I want to see her rebuild the Jedi Order. I want to see her implement that philosophy of being this kind of conduit for the light and the dark and being this balance, this bridge, and how that separates her and how that makes her distinctly different from Luke and Jason and Jaina and all that. And we have, comments down below like Jackson and people who have said, basically Ray felt like a lesser version of Jaina without being related to the sequel or the Skywalkers, and Jaina and Ben feels like a lesser version of Jason, but without any of the backstory to actually build up to him turning to the dark side. So, and it's true. I mean, you can't help but do that comparison. Almost everybody thought Rey was going to be Han and Leia's daughter before that movie came out, and everybody thought Kylo Ren was going to be Han and Leia's son because it just felt right to pull from the books, right? I think now is your time to separate them. What makes Rey so different from Jaina? What makes her different from Jason? What makes her different from Luke? You have to double down on that. So that's the main thing I want them to do is just embrace the personalities of these characters. Get away from not to fully tackle the let the past die line from Last Jedi, but you kind of have to at this point, right? Like this one of the stench of the sequels is that you held on to the past for too long to the point where you kind of tarnished that bridge between the past and the present, but then you also didn't write a story that was good enough to bridge the past to the present. So like it was just this amorphous thing that couldn't decide whether it wants to be spiritually embracing the legacy of Star Wars or something new. And so now is your time. All the characters in the films are dead from the past, besides Lando. Now's your time to move on and tell the Rey story. So they need to do that. I would love to see. I, I was gonna say I'd love to see Jedi Finn, and I would because I just don't want them to create another plot point on the Rise of Skywalker not to deliver on. But I think Finn was far more interesting not as a Jedi personally, just because he had his own like section of the story that was unique to him, and it's being a stormtrooper who turned good, especially with the way stormtroopers were enlisted in the First Order. It's even darker than the way the Empire did it. The Empire, they were just conscripts. You joined the Empire and you became a stormtrooper, right? In the First Order, you're kidnapped and then brainwashed as a child. Go into that, explain a little bit more of that, and if you're going to do something with the Force with Finn, have him deal with the light and the dark. I think he could be your character that's kind of struggling in between there because he's been subjugated into this, really oppressive childhood, and we never really deal with the consequences of that other than a couple lines in passing in the sequels. So do that. Poe, I think is the least interesting to go into, but you would have him kind of in that Leia-esque role, maybe not a full leader, but he is somebody who I expect to be kind of a general in charge of the New Republic or whatever they're calling the government at the time, Navy, and he's kind of somebody who's learned the lessons of leadership for the sequels, and now he's taking it to heart and having to implement a lot of the things that Leia had him practice. And so I think he's the one that's just kind of there and a part of the story, but he's definitely to me not as interesting as what they can do with Rey and Finn. So that's where I see that going. There's a lot of other characters to speculate about, but I think you have to hone in on those three or at least those two, Finn and Rey, and really push them forward because their stories are open enough to have that future of Star Wars. And that's where they should go if they decide to focus on those characters.
I mean, I think right now the character who's gonna definitely get the most development is gonna be Finn. He's got a book coming out by the end of the year, right? He's gonna be infiltrating like a remaining First Order cell or some sorts. I haven't read the bio in a while, but I don't expect that to be the end of that, right? Like we still want to all kind of see that Stormtrooper rebellion, him inspiring all these others to like wake up from their brainwashing, whether it be through the Force or through his influence, his magnetism or whatever in the Force, right? I'd love to see more of that. And I don't think he has to necessarily be a militant Jedi throughout his life, but at least for this early stages, especially with the fact that I just don't see a unified government happening at least for a couple of decades in Star Wars. I'd like to see how he'd interact, right? And him kind of being asked almost as like his own little militia of like, "Hey, you're like first order uprisers, right? You guys will be able to like sway these guys." And frankly, you could also use him as a way to like see the differences between the first order remnants and the final order fanatical Sith Eternal led legions and all that, right? Like I'd love to see like how we understood a lot more about the First Order through him and his first few scenes of The Force Awakens. I'd love to see him do something similar to that. So, yeah, lead these uprisings, see what's different between the First Order and their brainwashing of children versus what the Sith Eternal did by raising and p all this different progeny of, like, generations of kids who fell in line with the Sith and were manipulated through magic and all this other crazy stuff they're doing on Exegol. Like, I think he can be a perfectly great character for understanding more about the state of the galaxy while still developing himself in the Force and, like, what his resolve is to push forward. Because like, yeah, there isn't much of a great arc for him, he goes from turncoat stormtrooper awakening to what he's seeing is wrong to, like, understanding it's not just for the people he cares about, but, like, the rebellion as a whole in The Last Jedi to, like, stepping into that leadership role in The Rise of Skywalker. It's not a great storyline by The Rise of Skywalker. I know he was praising a lot of stuff with JJ, and he's like, "I'm only gonna come back if JJ's involved." John, no. I mean, JJ cut you out from all that stuff. Whatever he was promised you was a lie, right? Or like none of that made it in there. Like, and he still had good scenes with John and all that, but we still have a chance to see what Duel of the Fates promised with the Stormtrooper rebellion and all that. We still have a lot of potential for him, especially in the first few years. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Starfighter is like talking about like how different parts of the galaxy are like undergoing their own little revolutions, and Finn is like leading so many of these first order stormtroopers and like protecting and harboring them while also trying to like make them better people and undo a lot of the brainwashing and all that. I think this he can be a fascinating leader of his own militia turned like semi-government, right? Like I think that'd be awesome to see. And I as much as him and Ray are very close, I don't necessarily believe that he has to listen and do everything Ray says. And I don't think Ray would want him to either. I think she'd be confident that he'd be able to come to her and and all these other Jedi they'll start popping up who've been survivors of Luke's order, maybe some Order 66 grandpas and grandmas, and be like, "Okay, we still have to all do it in our own way now, right? And I'm fine with you doing that. I'm just here to help you out with like some more advanced techniques and stuff." I can absolutely see that kind of being how the initial days of Rey's leadership of the Jedi will look like, and how he'll have almost like a Kip Duron sort of influence on the future of the Jedi. I can absolutely see that. Hopefully nothing crazy as Kip because, man, Kip is just an idiot in so many different ways. But yeah, but like I'd like to see that, and not necessarily the darkness of it, but, like, what he really is standing up for. More of, like, a Revan before he falls in the Mandalorian War to the darker elements of that war and himself and obviously the Sith, so I'd love to see that. Poe, I think, is gonna be pretty interesting how he's transformed the Resistance. He's not gonna just turn it back into the New Republic Navy and what was already there. A lot of those guys defected specifically to go to the Resistance, use older ships and all that because 'cause they're like, "Yeah, well, we're not gonna do that." Like, that they're not doing anything, just sitting on their butts and, letting this all happen. We've seen how the government has been stalled and how our training is just for, like, diplomacy and all that. I can absolutely see how he would lead as a general, and he has the clearest direction. Is it the most enticing? Probably not. And then Rey, I mean, we've talked about it. I've been saying, like, yes, we wanna see what her Jedi Order looks like. It's gotta be different than Luke's, it's gotta be different than the prequels. I wanna see what new inspiration she takes, what new sort of villains that she faces because let's face it, I think the Jedi are gonna be a little bit more of like wandering shaman in the galaxy, helping out as needed, as opposed to like, being centralized or having oversight. This is the first time where they'll be almost like the EU Jedi, where before they fully get kind of taken over by the head of state, like Dala and everything kind of subjugating them, they kind of have like a strong political influence. And I think Rey just kind of being almost like a Superman-esque character with her Rey Jedi Order, like just going to do that because it's the right thing to do what not only causes interesting tensions, but also allows for her to redefine the Jedi with the people that she gathers with they come. Kinda does like the Bantam Luke era of like all these different Jedi, like Camp Solastar and all that kinda coming to him, right? And like learning to redeem themselves, learning to activate their powers and still be different individuals as opposed to like later Luke where it's a little bit more rigidity, more of a proper order. So that's how I see it. We've talked about this topic to exhaustion at this point, but yeah, I think you're gonna see these 3 characters. Ransom, I'd love to see, but he's a cameo, and Claudia Gray's headcanon is of Tom Hiddleston, and that's a very expensive actor.
Well, I mean, if you want to get a little EU inspired with that too, like the constant flux of who is chancellor or first senator or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it at this
Yeah.
point. I mean, you could have a bunch of different people. You could really go into the politics. That would be something that I would definitely welcome, because we did nothing with that in the sequels. So
Uh,
it would be nice to bring in some of these other characters, and we will see what they do. But yeah, you got to focus on that core. I mean, you have to focus on Ray. She is the core of the whole thing, whether you like her or not. If you're going to do that story, you have to really focus on her. And then you have to elevate Finn because he's the one that had the most missed potential from the sequels. So, yeah, we shall see. Jackson Birch says, "Hey guys, hope you're doing well. What era do you think has the most untapped potential right now? The High Republic, the Old Republic, or the post Rise of Skywalker part of the timeline? Which one should be prioritized?" Well, thanks for that question, Jackson. It's a difficult question and one that's hard to think about. I think High Republic for me would be last out of the three, just because we just had 4 years worth of books in that era. There are still plenty of gaps, and they still haven't really defined when the High Republic starts and how long it goes to. We know the Acolyte's supposed to be the end of it, which means it goes for about another like 80, 90 years after Trials to the Acolyte. So there's still plenty more to come from the High Republic, and they're definitely not going to let it go anytime soon. I hope they take like a year off or so and just kind of let this ending breathe for what it is, because it is a really strong ending, and I don't want to just have more be inundated with more content for the High Republic immediately after. So I'm good with taking a couple of years off, maybe 2027, come back to the High Republic for a couple more books about some of the survivors of Trials. But that's last to me. Old Republic, I think, has the most potential, at least if we're talking about canon. It has the most untapped potential because, like we're talking about with 100, 200 years post Rise, if you wanted to do a story there, it's the same with the Old Republic. It's something that would have all new characters, all new timeline from the majority of people watching those movies or shows or whatever it is that you do with that story. It would be something new. It would be completely new, refreshed. And I think in general, the Old Republic has a mystique around it that, like you were kind of saying earlier with Abeloth, Sonic, like a lot of people love the Old Republic and don't know anything about the Old Republic.
yeah.
And that's because they have seen a bunch of YouTube videos with some cool artwork that shows some Sith, or they like the idea of Jedi versus Sith wars versus Mandalorian wars, like all these factions. And I agree, it's incredibly cool. And one of the cool things about the Old Republic too is, and I have to break this to a lot of people who comment on my book videos and stuff that I do. Is we really don't have any story for it in books or like there's only KOTOR, some brief miniseries about the tie-in to the MMORPG, and Tales of the Jedi in the world of comics. There's 4 total books in that era in the main Old Republic part of the timeline. They do count technically the first 2 Bane books and Knight Errant as Old Republic, but I don't really count those because they're so far after the main Old Republic story. And then you have the games. So it's an era that has a lot of untapped potential. It's got a great aesthetic. It's got, a mystique around it that people really like. So I think it's the most untapped potential if you're talking about with canon. If you're talking about in general, obviously it's post Rise of Skywalker because that's completely blank slate. You could do literally anything. But I think in terms of a business decision, it would make the most sense to go Old Republic because that's so far a very still pristine period of Star Wars. It has not been tarnished yet. It still has a lot of people who love it. You will have a very adamant group of people who will come out against anything they do making it because they're just going to say, oh, it's not going to be as good even without seeing it. But you can, if I say this literally every stream, but if you double down on Old Republic, you make that like The only thing you do, kind of like just saw with High Republic, right? If you make Old Republic content 80% of what Star Wars is putting out, and then you've got 20% of everything else, then it can work in my opinion, but it can't work if they do it the way they've been approaching other stuff right now. It can't work if you say, okay, we'll make a season and then we're going to wait 3 years to make another season. And then we're going to
Oh,
wait
no.
another 2 years to make another season after that. You have to go all in. You have to write the story for like however many seasons you want to tell, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. You have to double down and go in and announce the movies if there's movies that tie in. You have to announce the books. Everything has to come out. Nothing can be delayed 2 years or nothing can be, let's wait and see how it does. You have to go all in with the Old Republic. If they don't do that, I think they're setting it up to fail, even if the stuff is really good in the first wave. If they do that, I think they can succeed, but it's something that I'm not 100% sure on. So I want them to do Old Republic. I think post Rise of Skywalker makes the most sense for them right now. But yeah, I think High Republic's last, no matter how you slice it, because we just have so much High Republic content.
Yeah, I mean, I wanna see what comes out of the High Republic leading into the Acolyte, and what Acolyte will transition into with the Plagueis story, with everything going on there, and what you can take the best parts of the Acolyte. I still think Chimera still has a big role to play if you do it right, books, animation, whatever it may be, and then you can lead us into the proper Plagueis, Palpatine, and then prequels, right? I think that's all still very viable. But it's good to take a break, like Liam said. We've had so much, like, even us, as dedicated as we were when it came out, right? It was hard to keep up with everything even back then, and it's only gotten harder the busier we've gotten, so, yeah, I mean, exciting stuff for sure. I think it's an era that's absolutely needs another big, investment into in, like, animation or live action, because we can't again, Acolyte, it doesn't truly sit in the High Republic. It sits at the very end of it, that transition to the prequels, right? It's just, okay, you're trying to set a point there, but that doesn't reflect the High Republic. It's just the visuals of the High Republic that are basically almost ready to become the prequels. So, yeah, that's not great, right? So I would say if you're gonna do something in the High Republic, it has to be set in, like, pre-Phase 2, because even Phase 2, it talks so much about, like, the exploration of the Jedi, right? The quest of the Jedi and all that, and they don't. They do it a little bit in the comics and all that with the Pathfinders and all, but it's still pretty vague about how much more like, it already feels like things have been explored, like, they're kinda almost not winding down per se, but they're on the downward slope, right, to the what's gonna be established by Phase 1. You can push it, like, where the Quest of the Jedi comic was at that point, where everything's a little bit more mystical, everything is a little bit more open, right? Like, they're exploring interesting cultures and places and artifacts and stuff that are tied to, like, the remnants of, like, the new Sith Wars, the Old Republic, and all that, right? I'd like to see that era. I'd like us to understand why the High Republic has not expanded so much of the galaxy at that point. I still truly believe there's gonna be a Dark Ages, a new Sith Wars equivalent, better written, frankly, that will actually explain how, like, thousands of years of warfare between the Jedi and Sith actually destroyed the galaxy instead of just saying like, "Oh, we're just gonna do Knight Errant and call it a day," right? So, I think we're gonna see some cool things there. But yeah, I that's my 3rd option. Like, I wouldn't go there because it's just been fleshed out so much right now over that, you know, 5-year timeline of sorts. I guess you can say like 50 or 150 because of Phase 2, but it's really just a few years even in Phase 2. But yeah, next up, I would go post Rise of Skywalker. I mean, they clearly look like they're prioritizing that with Starfighter. They want to do Rise of the Jedi Order at some point. I wouldn't be surprised if the Kinberg trilogy is, something that's set in that era, or at least like is like the conclusion of that era, or as like a 10, 11, 12 into the Skywalker saga. I don't know what they're gonna do there, but they are working on it. And so I think that's exciting for me personally because I just want it to be an era instead of just a 1-year trilogy. And again, books, comics, video games, give me more of that stuff. That the only way you're gonna fix it, right, is to do the George Lucas way of just spamming it onto people to the point they're like, "Okay, I like a lot of this stuff. I don't necessarily love the story, but I'm liking these stories. I'm liking these characters. Oh, they're popping up with some of these original characters from the films. Okay, I can at least appreciate how they've matured and changed and some of the interesting evolutions." That still all has to happen no matter what. It's just do it as soon as you can. more time you wait, especially with the streaming era of Disney now coming to a close with the bubble exploded across the industry, this is the best chance you can do it, and it seems like Starfighter could be a good first real step to that. I'm looking forward to all the Gosling memes personally because it's very funny seeing all of them. The very stoic version and the very comedic version. But yeah, Old Republic has to be the most structured thing Star Wars has ever done. And like Liam was saying, I want to have these phases. I want these waves almost. With books, comics, everything delineated, right? Like the way like James Gunn is talking about his first phase of the DCU and everything. That should all be that should be things that are like marketed and presented in videos and all that. But the money involved, I mean, Andor was so expensive, and they're like, "We can't do it because, yeah, actors are aging up and all that." But you have to basically do a at minimum, an Andor budget, if not more, because of how insane whole Sith armies will look, how insane Jedi armies will look, how insane some of the space battles will look. If you do, like, a Star Forge, that's gonna be a lot of money, especially to show off just how beautiful it can truly be because it is a tool of creation, not necessarily destruction, right? So there's gonna be so much stuff that you can do in interesting tombs and all that, that you can keep the budget limited, but KOTOR still has some very iconic visuals that's gonna be expensive in a way that Andor never really even tries to get to. So it would be the most expensive investment for, like, 10 years at minimum with them filming it like Game of Thrones, like, it's gonna be crazy. I think it's doable, but it almost depends on, like, stuff like the post-sequel stuff and the Mandalorian Grogu possible trilogy and the New Republic stuff actually normalizing and accelerating and getting people's interest up, and then more money flowing and merchandise flowing again to then have Old Republic ready. Because I truly believe Old Republic will still have connections be made or implications on stuff in the prequels, on the original trilogy, on the sequels, just recontextualize a couple of things about how we look at different factions and powers of the Jedi and Sith and all that. Because 'cause you're gonna have to connect it to the most commonly known Star Wars stuff. But if you're truly trying to make it something that 2 generations from now, is that Star Wars for someone? Like, that's what they think of as Star Wars immediately, and, their elders can talk about the early 2000s with the KOTOR 1 and 2 and Star Wars: The Old Republic. You're gonna have to put a lot of money into it, and you're gonna have to get all the young new cast. You're gonna have to connect things that should have been connected more clearly, like Tales of the Jedi ills, or is it, like, actually properly 30 years before? Are we still gonna do stuff like in the KOTOR comics with Zayn? Is that, something that can fit in here as a transition? Is that just more something left for books and comics? Bane, he's at the end technically of the Old Republic, but are we gonna actually fill out the stuff leading into him? And his whole look and armor is very different in canon, like, we're gonna have to deal with the small little pieces that they've given us and blend it all together and be committed to it from the start, regardless almost of opinion. Like, you just have to full send it and just improve your execution or writing, but otherwise stick to it. That's that's a lot of money and time. I don't think many franchises have ever done that. Star Wars has never done that. Like, you can say everything about the sequels not being planned right. Yes, absolutely, they should have been way better planned. George Lucas didn't have a plan for all of this stuff. Like, he wrote some treatments and stuff for like 12 movies, but he didn't have a plan for 5 coming out after 4. Nobody expects 4 to become the blockbuster of the 20th century, right? So this would be arguably cinema's most like emphasized constructed thing. It'd be so much money invested, and it basically does require all these other things that they're working on, like New Republic era, like everything that we're seeing in this post-sequel era to actually work. It's a lot of ifs, and I hope they do pull it off, but yeah, to truly make KOTOR 1, 2, and, like, a 3 in TV show version, whatever they like of the Old Republic, New Sith Wars, Bane, and everything be on screen in the best possible version with a condensing of all that material. Wow, it's gonna be one of the greatest achievements in filmmaking if they pull that off.
It would be, and they definitely would have to front, like, almost $1 billion worth of
Yeah.
money to, like,
Yeah.
just be like, "We're going all in," and we'll see where streaming is at that point because I do think TV is definitely ideal for it, but if they did it, I think it would be I mean, it would be successful if they get the right people to write it and, go all in on the storytelling, but you can do it, And there are plenty. I'm also very tired of the fact that there are plenty of authors and architects of these things that are there that you could bring in as consultants. Not that they're filmmakers, but like Drew Karpyshyn basically is the Old Republic. He was one of the lead writers on the game, the first game. He wrote the Bane books. He wrote the Revan book. He was a writer on the Old Republic. Bring him in and have him help you craft the narrative and tell him what you want to do. And I'm sure he has ideas for how he would, consolidate and solidify different things. But yeah, it would be awesome if they did it. We'll see if it ever happens. We got a new super chat from Jackson. Thank you so much for the super chat, Jackson. Who said, I liked what Jedi Survivor did with Tanalorr. Yeah, Tanalorr is another cool piece of lore that definitely needs to be explored, especially the fact that we're now at the end of phase 3 of the High Republic, and spoilers for Trials of the Jedi, we don't go into it there. So there's still a lot of room. It's another little piece of High Republic era storytelling that is definitely open to coming back around. I mean, part of future stories. So definitely would love to see that again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, Jedi 3 is almost gonna have to start on Tanalorr, I'd hope, because we've only seen, like, kind of the looks and the ferns and, like, where you fight Bode. That's really about it. Like, we haven't explored Tanalorr. So, I mean, if it's such a if it's the whole point of the game is to get to Tanalorr for the path to exist, I'd like to see what that means, right? And what you can uncover from the past. There's a lot more of the story from the High Republic to be told, like Liam is saying. A new story, obviously. So what happens to Tantalor afterwards? I mean, we've talked about it before on stream. It wouldn't be surprising if like Cal starts learning a little bit more like Night Sister magic. She learns a little bit more of like traditional Jedi arts, and it they almost kind of create their own like Force user order that's disconnected from the Jedi, but still like instilled with the values and the morals of the Jedi. And because they get to be secluded here, like they can just populate the planet and stay safe. Like Vader doesn't know about this. Palpatine doesn't know about this. They can jump into the future 20 years and have them finally come out when it's safe, when like a Jedi senses something, like a Luke might sense something or a call being made when Tantalor actually needs help or they feel like it's right to return the galaxy. There's a lot of different ways you can approach Tantalor. I also wouldn't be surprised if Tantalor is immediately ransacked in the next game or something and like loses a whole value. But I do think there's just a lot of stuff you can build out of that.
They absolutely should. They should go in on it. I mean, I love when there's cross media storytelling, right? And it just
Yeah.
enhances the world. And the High Republic elements of Survivor were the elements that felt the most kind of disjointed with the story. And so adding more, fleshing it out during the High Republic itself, I think would retroactively help that game as well. So thanks for that super chat. And we do have about 5 to 10 minutes left in our stream tonight, everybody. So if you are at the bottom, you'd like to get something on the stream that we won't get to, send in a super chat. We greatly appreciate the support and we will answer it first. We're going to run through as many of these last few as possible. Critical Thinker says, favorite arc of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Been a while since I read it. But at the moment, it's American Gothic, the Constantine arc, and the one where he fights Batman. Yeah, that one's great too. I would say American Gothic is probably my favorite overall arc. The one I always remember, and it's one of the most iconic issues of any comic ever, is Anatomy Lesson. It's so good. It's the one where he kind of figures out who he is. Is he still a human, or is he now Swamp Thing? And that's brilliant stuff. But the whole thing's great. I have a hard time remembering. It has been a very long time since I've read it as well, but I have a hard time remembering the specific arc names. But if you want to go by like the volumes of the trade paperbacks, which is how I originally read it, volumes 2, 3, and 4 are just perfect comics. So I would say those. And I have a feeling you're not going to have a specific one, Sonic. So I'll move on to the
Nope.
next comment from Jackson, who says, I'd pick Jason, Jaina, and Anakin Solo, but who would you guys choose from Legends, and what era would you set it in for an MCU style phase with a big crossover event? Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you, Jackson. I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. So you're saying like if we picked characters to have their own like individual movies, kind of like MCU, and then they all team up in like a big event. Is that what you're saying? Maybe clarify that at the bottom, and we'll come back to your question because I'm a little confused what you're specifically asking. And then Jerome Valar says, if Disney forced you to do a new trilogy, would you do either Knights of the Old Republic or a trilogy after the events of Episode 9? Well, we kind of just got that question. I personally would do Knights of the Old Republic, although I think to fully get the KOTOR story or the fully get the Old Republic story, you would need TV and film and like or committed like 9, 10 movies to go all in on it. If you're just adapting the game, that first game specifically, I do think you could do a great trilogy of movies that would really adapt the game and be able to go beyond the game and incorporate a lot of the other lore. I would pick that personally. But yeah, what would you pick, Seneca, out of those two options?
I pick a trilogy after episode 9. I think there's just a lot more flexibility right now for that. Uh, KOTOR, I could see a KOTOR 1 being done in like almost a 3-hour film and a KOTOR 2 in the same way. And then you could do a KOTOR 3, all those original ideas that they wanted to do and make that the third film in the trilogy. But you'd have to condense so much of it. Like, yeah, a lot of the game is really down to gameplay and interactions with NPCs and all that. There isn't massive amounts of storytelling that couldn't be handled in like a well executed film. I just yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I just don't see how that KOTOR being the centerpiece of the Old Republic, that's cool and all, but it makes more sense over seasons. You're like the whole fun of those games is that you get to like sink into those characters. You get to see that slow reveal of Revan as your character and all that. You get to see all of Krea's like very interesting philosophies as a Jedi and then as a Sith and all that, right? Like it's that stuff works with time. It doesn't work when you're doing more of like a classic Star Wars film. You could probably pull off the first KOTOR in like a decently condensed film. I don't see how you couldn't per se. Like you'd cut out stuff like fighting the Rancor by placing a bone with a bomb in it. Like that stuff probably doesn't make into the film, right? But you could I don't think how you can see any way of doing KOTOR 2 honestly as a film, right? With some of its philosophy and all that. It would be such a almost like The Force Awakens is The Last Jedi, like Whiplash. You're like, "Whoa, this is just very different tonally, everything's very different. What do you mean there's a Sith triumvirate? When did this happen? Didn't they win at the end of the film?" Right? There's a lot that's missing between 1 and 2, frankly. And then if you're trying to finish off 2 and 3, 1 and 2 into a 3rd film that actually combines both ideas and philosophies, a trilogy would be too hard, right? It's too complicated, and the scale is, again, very massive, even for movies. It is pushing it even for a movie level budget, so I would say after Episode 9, a trilogy, because it doesn't have to be a Skywalker saga trilogy. It can just be a trilogy of stuff like Rey's New Jedi Order or, like, an informal trilogy of, like, 1 film for Rey, 1 film for Finn, 1 film for Poe, right? And you could see, like, just their legacies kinda be defined and how they grow into their 30s and 40s and 50s, right? You can do cool things like that and still not be like, "Oh, it has to be a Skywalker film," right? So yeah, I think that there's just way more potential because there's nothing really super defined there. KOTOR is just there's so much defined there and so rich in detail that it's so hard to pull off in 3 films.
That's fair. I love the idea of trying to tackle one of the most iconic Star Wars stories and really just seeing it come to life on the big screen. I just think that definitely gets me more excited. But you never know with something new, it could always turn out to be the next KOTOR. It could be the next great thing. So you never know. But I think we got to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. We've gone over 2 hours now, but we've gotten a lot of great comments and questions. So make sure you bring these back for next week. One of the positives of slow Star Wars news weeks is the fact that we get to talk to you guys the whole time. So it's been a lot of fun talking to you guys and getting your questions and comments. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the show as well. Make sure you come back next Tuesday. Again, we'll be live talking about the latest Star Wars news. If there's no news, taking your guys' questions, comments, anything you'd like to discuss. Bring it all back next week for next week's stream. Make sure you like the video. If you haven't, more people are watching right now than have liked. So make sure you hit that like button, scroll down. It's very easy. and it helps us out a lot. Subscribe if you're new and watching this on replay. Make sure you join us every week. If you are following us for the first time on this live stream as it's live, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next few. Like we said, we're going to have a lot more content coming throughout the week. New videos every Monday, Friday. Also, shorts Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Streams every Tuesday. Polls twice a day, every day. So there's a lot you can get here on Star Wars Lads. Make sure you check out our Patreon and YouTube membership programs for even more content. There's a lot of great perks, exclusive videos, exclusive live stream perks, exclusive shorts. We also have early access to new videos and new content. We have member exclusive polls, lots of great stuff on our Patreon and YouTube memberships. So make sure you go check those out and see if there's anything that is right for you over there. Thank you so much for watching our stream tonight, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed it and had a great time with us. We sure had a great time tonight with all of you. And we will see you next Tuesday for even more Q&A and Star Wars news. Good night, everybody.